This patch is bonkers. There is so much to cover. Let's just jump straight into it before I lose my mind. First up, Hela is getting a little bit of a nerf. This looks like a fairly light touch. My understanding of Hela in the current metagame is that she is not like overwhelmingly powerful, but she is the least work you can do for that power. So her play rate is very high, while her win rate is fairly middling. Normally, a relatively middling win rate would be enough to force people off of a deck, but it doesn't really seem to be in a situation like this one, where the deck is so easy to play and the output feels so good when you have it, that Hela actually has like a relatively inflated play rate relative to her win rate. Her win rate, to me, seems to be like 51, 52%, like not like the best deck in the game, but is played enough that it becomes a sort of default setting that you have to expect and you have to prepare for. Hela's power has been the baseline for this metagame, and interestingly enough, I do think that this change is a way of increasing the variance in an already variance-heavy deck. Hela is gaining a point of power, but now everything she brings back has -3. Now, this would be a big deal if every good Hela deck wasn't already playing Luke Cage. So what this is effectively doing is putting more of a tax on what it takes to get to your best draws. Now you need a very specific curve of like Luke Cage into Hellcow, into another discard, then you're getting 3 full power cards back. That's a really good thing to do, don't get me wrong, but it's adding more variance into it, and in the games where you don't get Luke Cage or unable to put him on the board in time, you end up having a card that is actually sincerely a little bit worse than she was. Bringing back 4 cards at -3 is way worse. It's effectively a 4 power nerf when she brings back 4 cards, a 3 power nerf when she brings back 3 cards, and she is getting a point of power on her body in order to compensate for that, going up to 6-7. But I do think that this is the kind of thing that can take a deck that is fairly middling but popular still to like, oh man, this is really not fun to play anymore. I'm not having nearly as much fun because now I also need to get the Luke Cage if I want to feel like my Hela is always going to win. You should still be able to play the same Hela deck, and you should still be able to have relatively similar results. It's just I think that in the games where you don't have Luke Cage, you are going to be a little bit more liable to just getting outpowered and outpointed, and I think that's actually like a meaningful change to how this card works. There need to be more games where this deck can actually lose. The biggest issue that Hela has to me is play pattern. That play pattern of nothing actually mattered except for me. I played Hela. You don't have enough points to compete. Now we're adding an extra step into that. I played Hela and I discarded the Infinite. And I got a Luke Cage. We're adding just some extra steps to get to that incredibly very powerful end game, and I think that's probably a good thing to do. On the whole, I'm in favor of this, even if it doesn't meaningfully change Hela decks. I do think that it should make the deck have a bit more game-to-game variance, and I think game-to-game variance is one area that Marvel Snap can really struggle with. When you look at popular decks like Hela, like Clog, there's game-to-game variance in them, but it's more about how do they get to that end game. How does Hela get to play Hela? How does the Clog deck get to, you have 2 units in this lane, I send 2 things over, and then I win the game the other way, right? Like, the variance game to game is not actually all that high. And I think that that is a weakness of Marvel Snap generally, and that a change like this does introduce some more game to game variance, where a game can play out completely differently based on, did I draw Luke Cage? Do I now have to blade my Luke Cage instead of blading something bigger? Games are going to be just a little bit more different with this card now, and I think on the whole, that's a good thing. Most people may be looking for a bigger nerf than this. I don't think that power level justifies it, but Lord knows I've had my fair share of complaints about the play pattern of a deck like this. But I do think there are many decks that have relatively similar play patterns. Hela is just the easiest and most obvious culprit. I think doing what they did here is in the right ballpark. I certainly don't have any better ideas beyond I would probably just delete the card, but if they want to keep this card around and functional and not terrible, I think this is a pretty solid way to go about it. This one might catch a lot of people off guard, but I don't think it should. Marvel Boy is getting a 1 point of power nerf. It probably won't matter at all, but I think a lot of people will come into this and be like, why the hell are you nerfing a Zoo card? Zoo isn't even that good. And to that I say, if you've been paying attention to like the data we have access to on sites like Untapped and SnapFan, you will notice that Zoo has sort of consistently been a high-level performer throughout basically every metagame that it has encountered since Marvel Boy came out. Personally, I think that's a good thing. My personal belief is that Zoo is basically the best possible deck that you can have as the best deck. Destroy is another one of those decks that I really love when it's the best deck. Cards like Marvel Boy that are allowed to have this immense amount of power jammed onto them because they are doing something that is fundamentally weak to other things that are happening in the metagame. I think that's awesome. I think it's good. I personally would not have made this change to Marvel Boy, but I'm guessing he was a statistical outlier because since his release, this has been true. There has been like a Zoo deck in the top 10 basically every single week. It's been one of the 10 best decks in the game, probably higher. Just a consistently solid performer. I don't really think taking a point off of Marvel Boy changes that in any way. I have ended almost every single discussion of Zoo on every tier list I've done, and it has been on every tier list I've done since Marvel Boy came out with Zoo is Zoo. It's just very hard for it to be bad. The numbers the deck creates are good. Personally, I would lean more into a Zoo meta. I think it's better when Zoo is stronger, so I wouldn't have made a change like this, but I understand if they wanted to drag the deck down just a little. If you are a Zoo gamer, I wouldn't worry. This is not where the majority of Marvel Boy's stats came from. You don't really have to freak out about losing potentially 1 point of power. That said, Zoo is actually a deck that has, in my experience, like more 1 or 2 point wins than it otherwise would. But I don't really think this is going to necessitate any changes in your strategy, any changes in your approach. You're going to be doing all the exact same things you already were. Marvel Boy will still be the best in slot. No real risk here. And for that reason, I feel like this is a defensible change because if I'm saying stuff like nothing's going to change about the deck, Marvel Boy is still going to be the best in slot, and it's losing a point of power, I guess it could have lost that point of power anyway, right? Also, fun synergy here, 3-1, and it gives 3-1's power. I think that's cool. Maybe I'm just getting too cute. War Machine getting a 1 point nerf, and I think a lot of people will consider this undeserved. I actually don't. I think that when I look at all the 4/7s they make, I feel like 4/7 is actually a fairly fraught stat line, the same way I felt like 3/5 is like a fairly fraught stat line. You don't want to have a 4/7 all upside kind of card a lot of the time. When you look at what is a 4/7, like Wiccan is a fairly acceptable 4/7 because of the deck building sacrifices you have to make for it, because it randomly bricks a decent amount of the time. That's fine to have that card be a 4/7. When you look at something like Stegron, it's not doing anything overwhelmingly powerful. It is all upside, but you have to like really figure out how to use it. That's fine to be a 4/7. I actually feel like they need to be like relatively clear on policing the 3/5s and the 4/7s. If Nocturne can't be a 3/5, I actually do buy that War Machine shouldn't be a 4/7. I also have been having a lot of success with decks that are splashing the move package and the combo package of War Machine together. I do think this is something that, like, this is where the metagame was probably going once we figured it out. And I think it's probably good that they headed it off at the pass. I also, again, don't really think it changes much about what this card is going to be able to do. I think Storm War Machine Legion is still going to be strong. I think Storm War Machine Legion Infinite as a package is going to be a good thing. It's going to be worth doing. I think it's strong. I think it's good. And I think that exploring that is going to be a big part of like what people are going to be investigating on day one, or at least what they should be investigating on day one. It's a strong combination of cards that can give you free wins that you can also use in order to manufacture wins in other ways, like play Storm, play War Machine. Oh, I didn't get the Legion. It's okay. I'm just going to win that Storm lane and then play the Infinite. That baseline power that this combination of cards gives you is already meaningfully strong, and I don't really see a problem with taking a point of power off of War Machine. They cited in the notes that it had higher win rate than I think any of us anticipated, and I buy that personally as someone who's been playing a decent amount of it. Playing War Machine is like one of the strongest things any deck with War Machine can actually do. Storm War Machine into Infinite, very, very strong. Storm War Machine Legion, very, very strong. A lot of the combinations of the things that this card does are very strong. Giving it 6 power instead of 7 seems like a solid thing to do. Honestly, this is another case where I feel like they're going to take a point of power off the card, and I'm not going to really worry about that at all. I'm going to be totally fine playing the same decks I was playing with War Machine anyway, and I keep coming back to this. If they can take a point of power off the card, and I'm still going to be doing the same stuff, they should probably take that point of power off the card. That's what live balance means. This is a good balance decision, in my opinion. I think sort of the opposite of the power creep style decisions that we've been seeing made recently. Negasonic Teenage Warhead getting a 1 point of power buff. Now, Negasonic is mostly unused as a card. There is one deck that I think this is a meaningful hit to, that is Cerebro 2. Now, I'm not someone who really likes to sort of shed tears over Cerebro 2, right? Like, I know it's like kind of a niche thing. I'm not going to be like, oh my god, but I know there are going to be people who are mad that they took this card away from Cerebro 2. I do know that. That said, I mean, Cerebro 3 does get it now, and Cerebro 3 gets to have Luke Cage, and you probably wanted to be playing Cerebro 3 if you're going to be playing Cerebro anyway, so it is a new tool for Cerebro 3. I'm excited to see if it can do anything there. The major thing that this card has done historically is been a very interesting and powerful mix-up in Supergiant decks. When you play it with Supergiant, if your opponent, say, plays one card face down on turn 5, you can slam a Negasonic into that lane, and that card will blow up. Depending on priority, of course. If you don't have priority, that's when you can put the Negasonic there. If you do have priority, you can use your Negasonic to blow up the stuff that they're going to play on turn 6. It's an interesting kind of situation, honestly. This is a card that has a lot of nuances to it, was best used in Supergiant decks, and now might actually have a chance to get played a little bit more widely because of that additional power. I honestly think this card is both frustrating and annoying to play against. I think it's a genuinely powerful card, and I personally would not have made this buff because I do not think that this is the kind of play pattern that I would want to promote in the game. It's just a hard card to deal with, in my opinion. That said, I don't know if this is enough to make it, like, meta relevant. Maybe this is the opposite of the other ones we were talking about, where it's like, okay, if we can take a point of power off of this stuff, and it's going to be fine, and we can give a point of power to Negasonic, and it's going to be exactly as good as it was. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I think there's some additional potential upside here, but there are other problems that Supergiant decks have in the current metagame that lead them to be awkwardly positioned in this situation, rather than, you know, actually being good. Like, it's pretty hard for a Supergiant deck to beat Hela. It's just not a thing that you're very good at doing. And so I'm not really sure where this card is going to fit in. It does seem like if people keep playing Hela, it's not going to be the greatest inclusion a lot of the time. I do expect people to get blown out by this in Arishem, but that was already happening whenever you randomly generated a Negasonic. On the whole, the one place I'm interested in seeing this happen is Cerebro 3. In a different metagame, I'm interested in this as a mild buff to Supergiant decks. This one's honestly kind of sick. We've been talking a lot about giving a card a point of power and just like being like, it'll be fine. This is kind of scary to me, honestly. Symbiote Spider-Man is a card that already had a lot of wide-ranging utility, and while it wasn't really blowing the doors off in any of these decks, it was the kind of card that you could just put into a lot of things, right? I talked earlier about the necessity of being careful with 4/7 stat lines. I think it's clear that at 4/6, Symbiote Spider-Man was not landing at a high power level, but was landing at a high rate of like, this is really fun, I enjoy doing this, I can play it in a lot of different stuff. I don't know if 5/7 actually changes that. I honestly wonder if Symbiote Spider-Man is a little bit of a cursed problem, where it's like, you can't make it a 3-cost ever, because if you make it a 3-cost, suddenly you're just doing 4Xs on your Shuris. You can't do 3-cost Symbiote Spider-Man because of stuff like that, because of all the 4 costs that it would then be able to curve into. But then you end up in a situation where you have to make this card a 4-cost, and then it's like, okay, at 4, we kind of have to pump a lot of power into this if we want it to be good. And so this at 4/7 is just sort of generically appealing to me. There's just like a bunch of stuff where it's like, yeah, how is this ever going to be bad? How am I ever going to be sad that I put a 4/7 in my deck? And I don't know if I'm ever going to be sad that I put a 4/7 in my deck. This has massive copycat vibes to me now, where it's like 4/7 and like sometimes it's just really broken, right? Where it's like, I'm going to play this 4/7 and it's like, you know, sometimes I'm doubling a Sage, sometimes I'm doubling a Hit Monkey, whatever it is. That kind of build of bounce is kind of interesting to me, especially right now, because that kind of build of bounce has a massive, massive, massive point ceiling, and that means that it can go head-to-head with Hela in a meaningful way. It's kind of interesting there as well. Being able to double up on important on-reveals is the main function of this card. Of course, the main reason to me that this card has not really landed as high as one might expect is that there is a lot of clog in this metagame, and that problem is not getting solved. You get Green Goblin when you play this guy, you are the saddest person that has ever been. Even stuff like a Debris Rock or a White Widow's Kiss, you will be incredibly sad. You will be unable to do the thing that you want to do. This makes it a better card when you're just like playing it as a free roll than it does when you're building around it. And I think that's the fundamental problem this card may have. It ends up being better the less you try to make it good. Because when you're just happy to play it as a 4/7 with some upside some of the time, where you're not leaning on it to be this thing that is your entire strategy, then you end up in a better spot. And I think that is an awkward situation, but I am kind of interested to see what you can do with like a splash package of Symbiote Spider-Man and some huge payoff in a good cards deck. I think that that actually may have some potential. One splash package that is worth considering is just like a normal good cards deck, and then like Symbiote Spider-Man, Black Panther, Zola, if you can fit that in there. I don't know if you can, because I think, you know, at least one of those cards, Zola, is not a typical good cards card. And I think that you can end up, you know, diluting your ability to be a good deck by having this combo in it that beats Hela. It's like a 3-card combo. You're not actually all that happy with it, when you could just be splashing a different 3-card combo, Storm, War Machine, Legion, and feel a lot better about what you were doing. On the whole, I think this is a fine buff. I'm a little worried that there's something here that we haven't found, but everything I've seen of Symbiote Spider-Man's performance currently makes me feel like 4/7 Symbiote Spider-Man is a safe thing to do. I don't feel that bad about it. I lied! There is something horrible you can do with Symbiote Spider-Man, and it is Galactus. Now, I personally am of the belief that there is just too much good clog for this deck to ever be a reliable choice, which to me is good. I know I've said a lot of stuff about how if I think that I can give a point of power to a card and it won't be that meaningfully better, then I should give that card the point of power, right? Like where I, in this analogy, am Glenn Jones, I guess. I get that, but this is the last card I would do that to. Like, I am not a fan of buffing Galactus. Every complaint I have about Hela, I have about Galactus. It is just a generally unfun and fairly obnoxious card. I don't think it's the kind of card that needs to be buffed. I think it's the kind of card that wants to be in a lot of metagames. I don't think it makes metagames fun. I don't think that nerfing Hela and buffing Galactus is a super cool thing to do at all. I think that a lot of what I care about in Marvel Snap is that games have interactivity, and I think the Galactus puts you in an awkward situation similar to Hela, where it's not actually interacting with you so much as demanding you interact with it. And the way in which you interact with it is much the same way that you interact with Hela most profitably, is by clogging it, by saying, you actually can't do this, you can't play these cards. And I think that's the other problem I have with cards like Galactus and Hela, is that because they are so one-note, high-level, high-power, I win if I do this, you need to stop them from doing this. The best way to stop them from doing this is by playing Clog. Clog ends up in a situation where it's like, okay, I'm the Clog deck. Let me go play Clog, and everyone hates that too. So they create metagames that you hate to play, and everyone else hates to play for different reasons. Because I don't think there are people out there who are like, I love Galactus, I also love playing Debris. And if they are, I hate you. But like, I don't think that's like a very common player type. I think if you listed like Hela, Galactus, and Clog, you'd list 3 decks that almost everyone can agree they hate at least one of them, right? And I think that's like kind of a worrying thing, where it's like, I don't like that the solutions to the problems are also bad. Like, I don't like the solutions to the problems are also not fun. I will note, though, a couple of my high-level friends have been playing just literally just Destroy with Galactus in it, which I think is like a fun little mix-up to have, because you have your Destroy stuff to like make sure that you don't get clogged. That's awesome. And you just have a random Galactus into Null. If you ever nut off with the right kind of X23 draw, there's some cool stuff you can do there. There really is. And so I think if I expect to see it anywhere, that's the place I would expect to see it, as a splash rather than as a fully dedicated Galactus deck. I'm excited to see what it can do, because as much as I complain about Galactus, if it manages to buff Destroy, I give a lot of things a lot of passes, honestly. If you can make Destroy a really good deck again, I feel a lot better about a lot of things. I really do. I'll give a lot of decks passes for being able to do that. All right. That said, still horrified. Cool little buff to Black Panther, a card that basically wasn't seeing play ever. I think there are a lot of people who are going to be like, this is a nerf because now it's Shang-Chiable. And I think that that's actually like a really interesting conversation to have because it has almost never been true, but Black Panther is so explicitly like a Wong Zola target that maybe it just is true. That said, I mean, you were Shang-Chiable when you played it on Wong anyway. You were going up to 16. So I guess it just like actually doesn't matter. I think that this is the kind of card that will still not see a ton of play, but what I do like about this is that it makes it a little bit easier to splash in that Sim Spider-Man, Black Panther, Arnim Zola endgame if I can try to figure that out. I think that's kind of cool. I like being able to splash that in. I think it's nice because now you have the Black Panther at 10, the Sim Spider-Man goes on to it at 7, so we're looking at 34, you Zola that, and then you get 68. I don't know if you could hear that, but as I was monologuing there, some stuff just fell off of my desk. I'm going to go get that, and we'll jump right back into this. All better. And of course, Black Panther, I think, will still be a little bit lackluster. It'll still be kind of only this confusing combo finish in Wong decks. But I do like that putting more power into it makes me actually want to consider it more as a sort of splash into other archetypes, because even when it's bad now, it's still 5/10. I can be happy about that. I can enjoy it. It's not the greatest thing on earth, but I can be like, okay, I get it. And I think that, honestly, if it were me, I might have gone farther with this card. I might have said, you know what this should be? This should be 5/6. It should double up to 5/12. You should be able to just, like, play a 5/12. And maybe that's ridiculous. Maybe they shouldn't make, vanilla 5/12. But it's not a vanilla 5 Cosmo. I don't know. I think that they could have gone a little harder on this, honestly. I really do. And I will note that even just Black Panther Zola now is 2 Infinauts. That's not nothing, right? Like, this is an interesting card that mostly runs into trouble with the fact that its best pairing is Arnim Zola. Also, can we talk about that? What is up with this game and making, like, specifically, explicitly, like, Hydra Nazi people mechanically best friends with Wakandans? It's not just Black Panther and Arnim Zola, it's Shuri and Red Skull. Like, why? I realize it's probably just, like, dumb luck, but it is weird that it happened twice, right? I realize that when you look at the stats on all of the public trackers, Madam Web looks like a bad card. All I can tell you is that in my experience, she is one of the best cards in the game. And I think a lot of that is due to the delta between the average person contributing to a private tracker, or even the average top 10% infinite player, and me and the people that I play. And I realize that can sound like I'm kind of jerking myself off here. I don't mean to. But what I am trying to say is that Madam Web is an extremely strong 2-drop and gives you a ton of player agency that allows you to do a bunch of strong stuff. The better you are at the game, the better you are at using her. She kind of reminds me of like a new sort of Loki style problem where the top end of the game is using her much better than basically everyone else ever is. Why am I talking about Madam Web when Kraven's on the board? Well, because that's the reason Kraven's not seeing any play. Madam Web and her little Madam Web package, Madam Web, Aranya, Ghost Spider, Vulture, Dagger, that goes into a lot of different things. You can be a pure move deck, you can be a clog deck, you can be an Infinite War Machine deck, you can be a bunch of stuff with that. None of those decks are actually playing Kraven. And I think that that is kind of sad in a way. And so I'm glad when I see this as a buff to pure move, right? When I look at this season, one of the biggest missed opportunities that I see for them is that they made this package of cards very good because at least 2 of them are new, right? The package of Madam Web and Aranya and that stuff, that's good. But playing Heimdall still isn't very good. I wish they'd put more care into that, honestly. They've done a lot to make move different stuff, right? We have bounce move, we have splash clog move, we have the move stuff in an Angela package, we have the move stuff in a Legion package with War Machine and Storm. We've got a bunch of move stuff plus whatever, but pure move is not amazing. It's fine, it's good, but even it's not playing Kraven. And so I think that, like, this is just a free point of power you can give to this archetype. You enjoy it, you're happy with it. They might not even still play this card, to be honest with you. Speaking of cards that are not in a lot of the top move decks, that it kind of is sad that they're not, Hercules getting a point of power buff. I have absolutely no issues with this. Whenever you look at any of the move decks, Hercules is like one of the first cards to go out because it is fundamentally uncontrollable. Hercules is excellent in the bounce move tribunal deck. Gonna be a pure upgrade there. I expect to see a little bit more of this card, but not a lot more. I talk about being careful with 4/7s and 3/5s. So why am I okay with this one when I'm not okay with some of the other stuff that could exist at 3/5? I think cards that are safe to 3/5 are cards that have demonstrably underperformed. And Hercules has demonstrably underperformed. We're in the middle of a move month, and he's not seeing a lot of play. And he's a pretty strong card, and I think people should take a second look at him. If his unpredictability is fundamentally an issue, then that is what it is. But you are going to win mirrors if you're playing the same deck and both of you are moving and you have Hercules. Hopefully, unless you lose the mirrors, because he also works for your opponent. And that's the problem that this card has, is that this is a card that is ostensibly there to help you, except sometimes you just lose because the mirrors go the wrong way for you. Because it's not like he discriminates here. He'll bump your opponent's cards out too. And if your opponent is able to steal your Hercules from you, you played a 3/4, 3/5 now, for no reason. You played a 3/5 that helped your opponent. And I think that's the fundamental thing that brings me to Hercules, is being okay to be a 3/5, where it's like, this is a card that has demonstrably underperformed. It has unique applications and a very unique profile, especially in mirrors, that make it a fine card if you want to make it a 3/5. I think this is totally acceptable to me as an option. I have no issues with 3/5ing a card like this. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for making it through that video. Let me know what you think of this patch in the comments. There's so many changes, and it feels like so many of them were the kind of changes where it's like, small and likely not impactful, but any number of them could snowball greatly. My metagame prediction is that it's roughly similar. Clog as a dominant strategy, small move packages, the kind of War Machine decks that we were trying to experiment with. I did a video on one yesterday. I expect to see those kind of decks still being successful. I'm interested to see if the sort of, not necessarily removal of Hela, because I don't really think that's going to happen, but a little bit of a down tuning, a little bit of a changing of what their low roll is. I think that might be helpful as well. And hopefully that leads us to a slightly more open metagame, because I do think she's one of those decks that really restricts what people can do. I do have some worries that perhaps she gets replaced by Galactus, at least on day one. That sounds absolutely miserable, but what can you do? I don't know. As always, I've been KM Best. You have been phenomenal. I'll see you in the next one.